I first met Shimon back in 2004 when we were both residents at the McDowell Colony in New Hampshire. And for those of you who aren't aware or familiar with the McDowell Colony, it's this amazing place that you're given a studio, a place to live, and food. And they bring lunch every day in this little basket, and they set it outside of your studio door. And it's an incredible place, and I hope all of you could one day be in residence there. Several years ago, I was serving on the Transmedia Search Committee, and Shimon had applied and had voiced a strong interest in becoming a part of the VPA community in some capacity. So after the search, it became clear both to the Transmedia Search Committee and faculty, as well as to the VPA administration, what an amazing opportunity it would be to somehow be able to get Shimon up at Syracuse. As a result of this interest, the faculty of Transmedia, the dean and VPA, and the Humanities Center were able to create a position for Shimon this academic year. He has been the VPA's Sandra Cohn Albert Visiting Artist this past fall and is currently the Jeanette K. Watson Distinguished Visiting Collaborator in the Humanities at the Humanities Center. As part of this position, collaborators were being solicited to work with Shimon over the whole academic year. And I was asked by several of my colleagues in Transmedia if I would have some interest in being able to collaborate with Shimon. I was quite excited about the opportunity and the prospects of working with him. Formally trained in photography, Shimon's work spans the disciplines including in video, site-specific installations, public projects, and new media. Deeply invested in relationships between space, place, and memory, his work often reveals new and thought-provoking relationships about our conflictual past and present. Histories of place are to be mined and collaged onto the present so that memory is both ignited and challenged. He is particularly concerned with issues of loss, communal trauma, and the potential for regeneration. Some critics have noted Shimon gives visual form to both personal and collective memories by introducing histories of marginalized and forgotten communities into the physical landscape of the present, animating public sites with images of their lost histories. His more recent projects have involved activating public and private memory through immersive multiple-channel video installations. So after meeting with Shimon and discussing possible scenarios via email, we agreed upon Shimon becoming a guest critic in my seminar this past fall, The Politics of Public Space. He served as a visiting critic over the course of the semester, meeting with the students and providing pointed critique and helpful insights into their own installation projects. Not only did the students receive such clear and thought-provoking feedback, but also I thoroughly enjoyed the collaborative teaching and work with Shimon. I would also like to highlight that Shimon has been a recipient of many prestigious awards and fellowships, including the Guggenheim Foundation, the American Academy in Rome, known as the Rome Prize, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. In addition, his work has been exhibited and collected by numerous museums around the world, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Corcoran Gallery of Art, the International Center of Photography, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Berlin Museum, and the Centre Pompidou, among many others. 4 books and several films have been made on Shimon's work. Winning a recent major competition and subsequent commission, Shimon is currently working on a permanent memorial artwork for the San Francisco police who have fallen in the line of duty. It is with my great pleasure that I welcome Shimon tonight.
What a great, oh, I gotta turn the microphone on. Did it all by myself. I was afraid for a moment, Lori, if I had nicked your lunch basket at McDowell or something that I wasn't remembering. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming tonight, and thank you so much to the School of Architecture, to Lori for also initiating my talk, to Anda French, and to Dean Robbins, who can't be with us tonight. So it is fun for me to be here with you, as I assume most of you are architects or in the process of becoming architects, because my work has always had a lot of crosstalk with the field of architecture. My background is originally in photography, but essentially I'm an installation artist. So I very much respond to physical spaces, public sites, urban landscape, etc. So I've been an artist since like 1991, which is when I got my MFA, and I've probably done about 25 projects in about 10 different countries during that time. I'm only going to show you tonight just a few just a few highlights. And I've sort of chosen ones I feel that are most relevant to the field of architecture. Is there a way that we can get the light levels a little lower? I like things to be as dark as possible. The less you see of me, the better. Cool. Thank you. Oh yes, right. PowerPoint. Okay. So what you're seeing is this is from my first project after art school. It was called The Writing on the Wall. It was in one of Berlin's former Jewish quarters. And again, this was 1991, so it was not that long after the wall fell, which was late '89. And this Jewish quarter was in East Berlin. And what you're seeing is you're not seeing a photoshopped image, you're not seeing a montage or a composite. You're actually seeing a color photograph of a building with a black and white slide projection directly onto the building facade of what used to be located there in 1930, which was a Hebrew bookstore. So if you walk on the street, while I'm doing the installation, you would actually see the building with the projection on it, and across the street you'd see me with my portable generator and my slide projectors and my camera equipment. So if you're on location, you say at site, oh, this is public art or this is site-specific installation. If you see the color photographs I make in a museum or a gallery, you say, oh, it's photography. These issues have never been that important to me. I'm somebody who really feels that ideas can live in more than one form as long as they do so effectively in each of those forms. The installations would typically last 1 or 2 evenings. As you can imagine, I had to do a tremendous amount of research before even starting the first projection. It was one thing to gather photographs from this neighborhood, and it was photographs of Jewish street life from before the Second World War. It was one thing to gather the photographs, but the East German government renamed and renumbered all of the streets after the Second World War as a way of, let's just say erasing the history. So I had to get the old city maps from like 1925. I had to go to Stabi Ost, the National Archive of the East. That in itself was an experience. Very sort of dust-laden, these huge books of maps. I mean, it was actually kind of interesting. But anyway, I got the old maps with the old lot numbers, and I would match them up with the photograph. And then if the original building still was existing in the early 90s, I would slide project a portion of it right onto the building. And if the original building was gone, like an empty lot, as many of them were, I would use a neighboring building that was architecturally similar to the original. So slide projection of former Hebrew bookstore. If we had more time, I could elaborate a bit on the reactions of local residents. Maybe I should just for one of them. Because as you can imagine, the people living in these buildings, coming home and seeing these projections of the former denizens or owners or shops that used to occupy those buildings, their homes, their reactions were interesting. And the full gamut, the full range. This one was kind of interesting. Okay, this one I had going for 2 nights. And the first night, so I was doing the installation, somebody comes running out of this door, an elderly gentleman, and he's sort of sprinting right towards me, like I'm across the street. And I was there that night with a television, like the nightly news was covering my project, so this was all recorded. He sprinted right towards me and screamed at me in German, my father bought this house fair and square from Mr. Jacob in 1938. And I didn't quite understand what he was on about, and he repeated himself. And then I said, well, do you know what happened to this Mr. Jacob after 1938? And he said, and I'm quoting, he said, why, of course, aber natürlich, why, of course, he was a multimillionaire and moved to New York. So it was a very weird, complicated experience. But I thought, and one could talk about that for a long time, the different levels to that. But what I thought was interesting is I, as an artist, am working in the realm of the imaginary and metaphor. And he was taking this as a very literal threat, like I was going to try to physically repossess his home. Now, to be fair, of course, some of that was going on in Berlin after the wall came, in East Berlin after the wall came down. Not so much related to, not so often related to Jewish, to the Holocaust and that issue. Sometimes yes, but more often it was related to former East Germans coming back, who had left East Germany, during the Cold War, then coming back. I just wanted to be fair and not. Slide projection of police raid on former Jewish residents. These pieces have very clinical titles. I'd give the address, and then the slide projection of former Jewish resident. I'm often asked about the crosses in the windows. And of course, the photographer in me probably noticed them on some level, even if just subliminally. In terms of how I composed the image. Slide projection of former Jewish residents. Those of you, I'm sure a lot of you in the room have been to Berlin, and Berlin, East Berlin doesn't look like this anymore. I mean, this is like the early 90s, right? And it was desolate. I lived in this neighborhood for 6 years, and it was just grim. And years later, of course, it became very gentrified, and schickimicki is I guess one of the slangs that they used to call it. But now all these buildings have either been torn down and rebuilt or have new facades. When I go to Berlin today, I can't find the locations where I did the projections except from the addresses. The buildings look that different today. And that's Berlin Alexanderplatz on the left side. Oh, I just wanted to say one other thing. Sometimes the graffiti was interesting. Was der Krieg verschonte, überlebt in Sozialismus nicht, which is in another image, which means what the war spared, meaning the Second World War, what the war spared did not survive socialism. So it was anti-East German graffiti, anti-DDR graffiti that was put up after the wall came down. So there's all these layers of 20th century German history, pre-war, history of the war, post-war socialist history, and then post-socialism. And into this very complex sediment, I'm sort of just tickling the underbelly. I mean, that's the way that I see it, right? I don't know other people would. But I'm kind of intervening, doing my intervention. In a very rich situation. Slide projection of former religious book salesmen, and you'd have these architectural juxtapositions still in the early 90s in East Berlin. You don't have these anymore so much. This was a pre-war building in complete disrepair on the right, because they didn't have money to rebuild after the war, the same way, in the way that the West Germany did, together with a socialist housing project, like public housing from like the 70s. Hat shop. Cafe, slide projection of former Jewish cafe with patrons. Slide projection of former Jewish resident. And I did a lot of work trying to kind of work with the architecture. Sometimes I used up to 3 or 4 projections. Usually less was more. But ultimately, sometimes people ask me, well, why did I do this project? What motivated me? And it wasn't that I didn't have a political message. It was nothing like that. It was more that it was very experiential. I felt the presence of this lost community everywhere I turned in this neighborhood, and I couldn't see it. and that I couldn't get my finger off that point. And that was sort of the engine that drove this project. Okay, so now we have a transition. Let me just, cool. So, okay, I am going to remember this. Okay, so now what I want to do is do escape. It's really nice to learn a new AV system the same time you're doing a talk, isn't it? Okay, this is going to go, I'm going to close that. I hope I did that right. I did do it right. Okay. And excellent. So that was like the early 90s. I did several projects in Europe, maybe about 10. No, we're good. We're good. I just like to fetch, you know. It's part of my character. Okay. So I was in Europe until about 97. I did a number of different projects. No, 96, excuse me. Probably I did it, at that point, I probably did about 10 projects across the continent. And then it was time for me to come home. I was homesick. And around the time that I was thinking about coming home, I was approached by an artist organization in Manhattan called Creative Time. Some of you may have heard of them. And they commissioned great projects from artists. And they approached me. I was still living in Berlin. And they said, Shimon, do you want to do your first major public project in the United States? It would be in Manhattan. And it was perfect timing, and I said yes. So the project was called Between Dreams and History. And I'm going to show you a sweet and concise 3-minute clip from the BBC about it, which just explains pretty much everything about the project. I will warn you, I don't particularly enjoy seeing myself on video, but that's okay. So I get teased a lot about this particular clip. But oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Now I realize. Thank you. This way. Excellent. And then I do Control F. We need to press play. In some ways, most wonderfully. And then we have to do volume up. I can do it.
Preparing to make his mark on Manhattan. Over the last 4 months, he's talked to residents
Excellent.
about their memories
Excellent.
of the neighborhood, as well as their own stories, superstitions, and dreams. He spent more than 2 years planning a laser art installation that will take place here in the heart of the Lower East Side, an area influenced by generations of Jewish, Hispanic, and Chinese immigrants.
I very much respond to spaces and to places, and by temperament, I'm very interested in memory. And how do we give visual form to something so, on one hand, so intangible and ethereal, but it's something, but on the other hand, something very real for us.
Shimon found his answer with lasers. Words made of light scroll across the architecture in real time, moving from building to building.
So if buildings could speak, right?
Poems, songs are all made visible on the street, some in English, others in Yiddish, Mandarin or Spanish, the languages of this community. It's a major art project that required a lot of coordination and backing.
You couldn't imagine a better marriage for public art as really stunning the public with great visuals and providing them with content that was incredibly thoughtful and appealing.
Shimon says that the lasers help animate his project.
The quality of laser light mirrors how memory itself functions. Lasers, they're very intense light, very focused, so they appear to have a presence. And yet, after all, it's just a light source. It's much more like a ghostly kind of writing, as if a ghost is writing out of thin air. That's the visual effect that I wanted.
This is high-tech public art at its most public. Anybody, it seems, who walks through this neighborhood and sees this art installation ends up staying.
Some of the things, are very touching. Like someone saying that they live so poorly in a tenement, and the conditions were so bad. And I know that these people come. This population has grown up in this area and have come from bad times.
And this is really a wonderful change, the fact that you can display something in art in a very simple form and in a very easy form. I think people could see it in a very clear and in a very beautiful manner. I think it's wonderful.
I think it's going to put a lot of people that live in the community to just
look differently at the buildings that they live in. For 2 centuries, this part of Manhattan has been home to many different groups of immigrants, but that's changing as affluent young professionals move in. But Shimon Attie hopes his laser art will help keep the older memories alive.
Okay. Previous screen? No. How do I get back to... Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Great. So, and that was 1998 when that project open to the public. The video, the moving image documentation you just saw is good at sort of showing the kind of the animated laser, the write-out effect that we created. It's less good at showing you the kind of the full scope and drama of that project. Yes. Oh, that's a good... What's being written on the wall? Well, for example, this one here, this is a handwritten memory. I met with about 75 residents, longtime residents of the neighborhood, and I asked them a series of questions. Maybe about 10 questions, like, can you remember your first memory of the neighborhood? Do you remember your favorite nursery rhyme? There was, if they could, I would say, so please write it down in your first language. It's a very diverse neighborhood, the Lower East Side. So what you're seeing here, for example, is the handwritten memory of she was an older Latina woman, and she wrote, and it starts on the other building. She wrote, I remember the Jewish church, meaning synagogue. I remember the Jewish church on Rivington Street, period. And she's referring to this building. I was 17 years old when I saw it for the first time. I'm 72 years old now. So there was kind of a site specificity with that particular memory, with that projection. That wasn't true of all of them. You know, each one's kind of different. But these are all, they were the kind of the imaginings, memories, musings of people who've lived on these blocks for a long, long time, typically. Although I did also have some teenagers who I met with as well. Excellent. And then this, and this is great. Oh yes, I see, okay. I see what I was gonna do. I'm going to start the slideshow again from well, I don't want to go from the beginning. I just want to go from here. That was my mistake. Can you just make that full screen for me? Excellent. So in around 2002, I went to Rome, to the American Academy in Rome, and I created a project called The History of Another, which again involved photography and site-specific, a kind of a marriage between photography and site-specific installation. And I was using present and ancient Rome as basically like a stage set or a foil for the grand history of the West. And I was trying to sort of articulate to raise questions as to who's on the inside of this history and who's on the outside. So I projected these images of people, individuals, they were photographed around between 1880 and 1920 of unknown origin to the viewer, trying to create this three-way relationship between Rome, the projections, and the viewer of the photographs. This project was really done for the photographs themselves. And the titles, again, they're kind of clinical and deadpan. At Portico di Octavia, Looking onto Temple of Apollo. And these are, in fact, large color photographs. When they're exhibited, they do, you know, they're like 50 by 60. The perennial man under the bridge image. You know, sort of images of sort of the abject, the outsider, the other interwoven with both kind of the glories and the ruins of Rome. A lot of them were done in excavation sites. Rome's difficult, you know. I mean, for me, Rome was difficult to work with. The way that the aesthetic treatment, the way that they aesthetically treat their history and their sites of history is so different than in Berlin. You know, they use these there's this very garish, like, you know, theatrical lights, city lights and color gels and whatnot. And that there was a point at which, you know, it's like I had to let Rome be Rome, but it was difficult. Rome does have a pyramid. Was it Celsius? I forget which emperor brought it back. The Book Salesman. This one I did have a little bit of a sense of humor about it because, you know, he is a book salesman and his clientele is this field of archaeological rubble. Excellent. And I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do this. Great. So now I'm getting a little more current. So the last few years I work mostly with the moving image. I create multiple channel immersive video installations. So, you know, for those of you, probably most of you know what that means, but if you don't, it's like going into a museum or a gallery, you walk into a space and you're surrounded by video projections. It's an immersive environmental piece. I still have the same concerns related to memory, community, body politic, etc. But in a sense, it's minus, I can't say minus the architecture completely, but it's minus a good chunk of the architecture. And instead, I try to sort of leave in signifiers of architecture, things that point at and allude to without illustrating. I'm just going to show you two quick little excerpts. One is from a piece I realized in the United Kingdom. I got a phone call one day in my studio. Somebody speaking incredibly fast and in an absolutely incomprehensible Welsh accent. And, you know, I had to ask him to repeat himself a few times, and then finally I understood what he said. He said, "Hello, Shimon. Have you ever heard of the Welsh village called Aberfan?" And of course, I haven't. Have any of you heard of Aberfan? If you were British and you were older than about 40, it would be like asking an American, where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot? Everyone remembers. And I remember. Is a little thing. So it was, you know, Aberfan is a national trauma in the UK, and a scar on their psyche. It's the name of a Welsh village, a little Welsh village that experienced a terrible disaster in 1966. A coal mining related, they use the word tip. A coal mining related little mountain, right? Mound came avalanching down the side of a mountain. And, you know, of waste products from coal mining like slag. And it went right through the village's only elementary school and immediately re-solidified. So it's kind of like a Welsh Pompeii in a certain way. There was only one school in the whole village. So something like 120 kids died instantly and 25 teachers. And 6 kids survived, just if they got lucky, like in an air pocket or something. So it was, you know, it was obviously horrific, you know, beyond words. And so in terms of how traumatic this was. And then the village became immediately famous as the village that lost its children. which was like the second trauma for the village. They became, you know, celebrities, and they became a site for disaster tourism. And for 40 years, they've kind of been tortured by the worldwide news media. Every time there's a big anniversary, 20 film crews come in from around the world, you know, and are very intrusive and ask people about the disaster. So when that phone call was from the BBC, and the phone call I got at my studio, and they wanted to know if they were interested to know if a contemporary artist could do something different with the village on the occasion of the 40-year anniversary since the disaster. So that was the context for what I'm going to show you. Instead of focusing on the disaster, because I made the villagers two promises. I said, I will not show any archival imagery from the disaster, because they're haunted by that stuff. Every anniversary, it's on national television in the UK, and the black and white photos and films of the, you know, they're haunted by it. And two, I said, I will represent you in ways you've never been seen before. So instead of explicitly focusing on the disaster, though it's there, you know, in the poetic register, you know, there's echoes of it. I took as my working method, what does it take to make a Welsh village? Every Welsh village has certain iconic types. There's the boxer, there's the fish and chips man, there's the male choir, there's the minister, there's, you know, there's the conductor of the choir. And I lived in the village for several months, and I filmed about 40 villagers basically performing their role, their social or occupational role in the village. Oh yes, we go down here. The piece is called Attraction of Onlooker, the Attraction of Onlookers. As I said, this one is, oh, no, that's the wrong button. If you can just make it go full screen, that'll be cool. It's a 5-channel immersive installation. So you have to imagine 5 screens that are each about 8 feet by 15 feet, 8 feet tall, 15 feet wide. So it's an enormous piece in high definition, right? You're seeing a really dumbed down viewing copy, like, you know, squeezing them all on one little screen. It starts with just a couple single channels, a little larger so you can see it better. She is the dancer. There's no digital effects. They are holding statuary poses on a rotating plinth. So when this is really shown, not on a viewing copy, but the real piece, you know, in high definition, you do see her, you do see their humanity. I left, sometimes when they blink, I leave some of that in, or her arms would be quivering. And part of why I use this visual strategy, I mean, it's easy to say these retrospectively, like, you know, afterwards, right? Sometimes an artist doesn't know exactly why they're doing something when they do it. But looking back at it, oh, he's the hardcore singer. Every Welsh village has a hardcore singer, like a, you know, disaffected late teenage youth who's, you know, screw you, dad or mom, and, you know, I'm gonna show you. Sorry, I was on about something. Yes, I was trying to reflect what trauma. I was trying to give visual form to trauma, that we freeze in response to trauma, but it's always an incomplete freeze because the forces of life keep moving. So this kind of moving stillness. I was trying to give a form that reflects what trauma, how we respond to trauma in general. And for me, you know, I don't have a relationship really with Aberfan. Now I do, but I didn't then really. And so I was more kind of using Aberfan as a point of departure to talk about traumatized landscapes the world over. And the second, he's the mayor. He's one of the, he's called the mayor. He's one of the 6 kids who survived. 3 of them are in the artwork, but the viewer isn't told that. But in any case, the other thing I was trying to do was to reflect this kind of voyeurism and rubbernecking that the village feels like it's victimized by, where they feel forever fixed in the world's gaze and the media's gaze, like they're in a fishbowl, floating in aspect. and not allowed to move on. So that was sort of another aspect of the situation there that I was trying to respond to. And she's the minister. And if one asks the question, well, why this strategy? Like, why take as your strategy, what does it take to make a Welsh village? Kind of like almost like an August Sanderesque approach. The reason I went that route is the literalness of the disaster is so thick in the air there. It's over-mediated to the maximum. And I was trying to kind of oxygenate. Now it's now it's going to the 5 channels. Again, they're tiny. You have to imagine each of them 8 feet tall and in high definition. The male choir, the choral conductor. But I worked in this way because I felt that maybe by working with cultural tropes or icons, or you could think you could even think of them as stereotypes, right? That why can't Aberfan be entitled to the same iconic types as any other Welsh village? So it was sort of, at least in the imaginary, they could take their rightful place as a Welsh village among other Welsh villages. The boxer, the fellow on the upper right is the Templar Knight, the medieval reenactment folks. Every village has a. I'm just going to scrub a little bit forward if this will work. On the left, that's the waitress, the South Asian, the immigrant shopkeeper. It's always South Asian, though, in a Welsh village. The bartender. So you can see these signifiers that I kept in. I didn't want it to get too literal because I wanted it to be that it could be your village, my village, any village. The family. And then I'm going to just scrub forward a little bit more. Oh, he's the ex-coal miner. After Margaret Thatcher, it was almost always ex-coal miners. Let me just go to the end, or towards the end. She's the traffic warden, and then the fish and chips man on the right. So it was a very challenging project, and you don't want to know about the food in rural South Wales. Okay, this is towards the end. I'm just going to let it play to the end of the piece. I don't know how to make this cursor go away, but whatever, it's fine. And we cut, the soundtrack we custom made for the piece. It's hard to see in this viewing copy, but that's a present-day elementary school student, and she has her hand on a map of South Wales. The subtitle for the piece is An Anatomy of a Welsh Village. He's the village house painter. The woman on the top here, she's the house cleaner, cleaning woman. But I lived in the village for several months. It was the only way to do this kind of project. And again, sort of the popping of the flash, you know, who's looking at who. While I was making the project, the BBC made an hour-length documentary about you know, which was the making of the artwork. So in that, you know, it's my interactions with the villagers, their response to being in the piece, also their response to seeing the finished piece. So we're very good with time, so that's good. I just have two more things I'd like to show you. One of which is a very different change in register now. You know, because I don't always work with, you know, traumatized landscapes. I mean, as you saw the Lower East Side project, so that's obviously quite different. I want to show you a piece that's very dramatic. It's called Racing Clocks Run Slow, Archaeology of a Racetrack. And of all things, it's about a former automobile racetrack called the Bridgehampton racetrack. It was in Bridgehampton, Long Island. All the big names raced there. And in 1994, the racetrack was closed for different reasons. But there's this whole community of several hundred, in fact, you know, a couple thousand people who are still around, whose lives intersected at this track. So I was approached. You know, usually I say no when I'm approached with an invitation, and I said no to the BBC for 2 years before I did the Aberfan piece. Projects are huge commitments, and you know, it's just a lot to consider, because it takes a year or two of your life to do it. So I was approached by a fellow who said, well, you know, he's into contemporary art. He used to own this former racetrack, and it was the 50-year anniversary since the founding of the track. Could he invite me to do a project? And I said, Bob, let me be frank. I don't care about racing, and I don't care about race cars. But if you can let me reinterpret, in terms of my own sensibility, things like how human memory inflects notions of speed, physical displacement, or you know, from one place to another, time, then we might have something to talk about. He said, Shimon, you can do whatever you want. So I created a 3-channel video installation. Again, you're seeing a dumbed-down viewing copy. You have to use your imagination. So this will be, you know, it's very basic. If you want to know the real scale, it's almost like, you know, 16 feet right there, and then here, and then there. I mean, it's a huge piece in the reel, in surround sound. What I did is I invited about 70 people to my studio whose lives intersected at the former track. Race car drivers, pit crew people, mechanics, the track announcer, spectators, kind of a long list of people. And there's no digital effects. This time we built and designed an even more complicated stage that moved in all these different ways. And they held a pose that we found together that distilled their role at the former track. 2 more things, and then I can show it to you, or 3 more things. One is that things that look like props are not props. They are real ruins from the former track. We actually sometimes dug them up, right? The second thing is the soundtrack obviously we modified it and treated it, but it's based on actual audio recordings that were made at the track in the 70s and 80s. And the last thing I'll tell you is that it's based on that law. The piece is based on that law of physics for which time slows down the closer you get to the speed of light. The faster you go, the more time stretches out. That's why it's called Racing Clocks Run Slow. Okay, I'm just showing you a couple minutes. It's like the real piece is like an 18-minute piece, but I am just showing you, again, just a couple of excerpts. Okay, and we're going to go here, and then we're going to do Control F. Excellent. Oh, we might need to do the audio. Would you mind, I'm feeling the audio is going to need to get louder typically. Yeah, and then, oh, it's already pretty high. Okay. No, it's pretty high, I think. Okay. So we're just sort of smack dab in the piece. It's like I said, it's just excerpts. That's not the very beginning. We're just sort of in the middle of it. So 9 feet tall, 9 by 16 each of these ones. These are all former race car drivers. She was the first race car driver in the U.S. Female, I meant, excuse me, first female race car driver. A lot of my tableaus were influenced by cinema on racing. There's always the nervous girlfriend watching on television at a distance. Again, there's no digital effects. These ruins, these detritus of the track, literally they're just, we suspended them from the ceiling. And again, you know, racing clocks run slow. And it's just sort of skipping ahead. The actual piece also has, it's 12 speakers in the round. So you're missing all the sound actually is very architectural. It's very three-dimensional in quality. It transcribes the space. It articulates the space along several, you know, all three axes. There's always the accident scene. The yellow flagger is, you know, a signifier for an accident scene. Okay, now it's going towards the end. I'll just let it play towards the end, to the end. So it was kind of this, like, you know, a very, you know, fantastical, you know, this sort of race that then has these fantastical pit stop scenes, and then we get hurtled back into the race. Also, this thing of you know, between race car driver and cosmonaut or astronaut, this kind of the escape velocity from gravity. So I was sort of playing again off of that a little bit. You know, at that point, the whole room is shaking. then, great. And the last thing I want to show you is something I'm working on right now. It's the first truly, I guess the actual term is for the genre is art in architecture. It's the first real sort of permanent art in architecture project that I've done. So I spend most of my days these days talking, I used to be an artist, but now I talk to architects all day long. I talk to structural engineers. I talk to lawyers. I talk to insurance brokers. I talk to the Department of Public Works. I talk to fabricators. Doesn't that sound fun? But anyway, so as Lori mentioned, I won this competition to create this memorial for the city for San Francisco, specifically for San Francisco police officers who've fallen in the line of duty. And I'm working with HOK architects who are building, let me just do this. Cool. They're building a whole complex of, it's called the Public Safety Building Complex, new police headquarters, new fire headquarters, new emergency first responders center. And so this will be located in the new police headquarters in the atrium. That's a 31-foot tall ceiling. This is the entry to the new headquarters. It doesn't open until 2014. We're just finished, we're near, we're almost at the end of the design phase. What you're looking at is the working title of the piece is called The Well of Gratitude. You're looking at about a 20-foot long, 10-foot diameter glass cylinder, which opens to an oculus above. And that cylinder is inscribed with, will be inscribed with expressions of gratitude from residents of San Francisco to the police officers for the sacrifices made. Now, all right, and there will be a kind of a wrap of, in the end it's going to be oiled steel rather than black marble, but it looks kind of similar the way that we'll have it modeled. These are just design renderings as you can see. And so the view this is sort of this is the sweet spot. I mean, the whole piece is about this, looking up. Now, I do have to tell you, unlike architects, I think, which are much more used to compromise, perhaps, because of the client, right? It's kind of the name of the game, right? Us artists, it's just sort of a little different. So I wanted to have an open oculus. I was really, I said, look, it's got to be an open oculus. We want this to be like this has to be special, and of course I didn't get my way. So it's going to be, like a shot glass skylight. So it will be non-reflective. It will feel like you're looking at the open sky. But still, I really wanted it to be open. And they were worried about, everyone was fine. The architects were great. The police department was great. It was the Arts Commission. They were worried about maintenance and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Pantheon, hello? How old is the Pantheon again? When was it built? 70 in the first century, right? But I could be wrong, if those of you who know those kind of things better than me. But it's about the first or second century, That didn't get me anywhere. But so, whatever, they don't call it public art for nothing. So it will change throughout the day depending on where the sun's located and the sky conditions. Late afternoon. Oh yeah, sorry, let me just, yeah, this is at nighttime, of course. It will have a glow. Well, I thank you all so much for your incredible concentration. And now I'm all yours, if you have any questions or whatever you'd like to talk about. So. Excellent. It's like an hour on the button. How good is it? Or a little less than an hour. That's good. Okay. Wasn't this your role? No, I'm just kidding, Peter.
Thank you for the lecture. It was very, very fascinating to see a select portion of
Right.
the work that you've done. I was interested in the earlier pieces. You were talking about sort of the confluence between the projected
Mm-hmm.
and I was noticing that you were using a very particular photographs by, it looked like it was a long exposure that you were using to take the photographs, and by taking it long, you began to eliminate a lot of the sort of ephemeral things, people walking past the image, or planes flying by, cars zooming by, to just register the sort of permanent things that were left in,
Right.
in the picture itself. And I was wondering why you chose to take it that way, just the space and the
Right.
rather than sort of
Right. No, it's interesting. You're actually quite observant because you're mentioning several different things, not just your main point about the people being absent, but they were indeed long exposures. It was with a very particular kind of film that I was wed to, that I loved, that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. And it was tungsten balanced, long exposure, color negative film. Maybe you can still get it in 35 millimeter, maybe. I don't think so, even that's probably gone. But I was shooting middle format. And I used that for very particular reasons about the aesthetic of it. It was also made for long exposures. These streets, if I didn't have long exposures, you wouldn't see any architecture. There were no street, hardly, there were, I shouldn't say no, there were not that many street lights, and they were very, very weak. So for starters, I'd have to have a 2 or 3 minute exposure just to bring up the architecture, right? Because some of these locations were like dark. But that doesn't answer fully your question. It's an interesting question because I sometimes did experiments whereby I would try to capture like, I'd say to somebody, hold still. Somebody answered, hold as still as you can for 2 minutes, right? Whatever. And they weren't effective. What would happen is when people were in there sort of looking at the projections, it would read more like documentation of an event. It just lost a lot of powers of evocation. It was much more kind of literal and like it was just documenting an installation. It became like documentation rather than I was sort of trying to have the photographs be things that that works of art that could live on in their own right after the installations. But the other thing I'll tell you, though, is sometimes, though, there's another side to this, which is that I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes I did let some of the live stay in them, but it was more like by choice of windows, like windows that were lit up, and there was life. One of them you see the fern plants. The other was that kind of garish pink window, the image which has the crosses. But they were definitely very considered choices. Even my Lower East Side project, I had the same thing again. And that was a little easier. The streets were lit better. Technically, there were more choices. And I took a whole slew of photographs, tons with people in them. There'd be 50 people looking at those projections just lined up on the street, or 2 people. They just weren't, they read like documentation. Which is fine, but I'm also a photographer, and I like, it's this whole thing about when you create ephemeral installations that are temporary and short-lived. It's nice to, if one is so inclined, to try to create very artful afterlives for these pieces, if you're so inclined, which I am. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
Is this a trajectory that you're interested in? Not.
Next question. What do you think? You think I like talking to structural engineers all day long? You know, and then you get into arguments with the architects about, well, where everybody says, well, this isn't in my scope of services. Well, this isn't in my, you know, and then you're arguing like whose budget it comes from. The answer, the seriously though, seriously is no, it's not. It's. This stays. I mean, there's a yeah, right. Now, I might feel different in 2 or 3 years when it opens. And if I'm happy with it in spite of all of the compromises, and there's one after the every week, there's just something else, right? You know, when you're humbled when you realize you're like you're just a cog in a little machine, you know. Like my memorial is like, what is it? I think it's my memorial. The memorial is 0.75% of the building's budget. So just so you know, if you ever need to be cut down to size in terms of like the pecking order. But no, I don't plan on it. I could be wrong, but it's not that much fun, to be honest. It's just not that much fun. But, you know, yes. So this is permanent? Yes. Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm, mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. The Oculus, yeah. No, you're asking a good question. It sort of leads to more fundamental issues about certain decisions that had to be made and that were allowed to be made. So for example, you know, I was given a very clear directive at the beginning: do not do new media. Don't do projections, don't do ethereal this or ethereal that. We need it to be permanent, durable media. So therefore that already created, okay, I have to work with durable media. Once I cross that bridge, the issue of maintenance related to something like this is not that, I mean, glass is fine, you know. Acrylic would have been a problem. I actually wanted to do acrylic. I thought acrylic could be more tactile, like some kind of custom cast acrylic cylinder. But that had maintenance problems for long-term it yellows. Glass is fine. I mean, it's laminated in different ways, and it's, but that didn't really. I would have had the open Oculus if it was up to me, and it just would have needed to be cleaned more often. I mean, water on glass is not something dramatic, but for a project like this, things like maintenance and long-term survivability, those are real issues. And public art commissions, they want things to be very, very easy.
I guess I'm asking more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you had your way,
Yeah.
would you?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I hear what you, yeah, and you're talking specifically about this piece. Yeah, it is a good question. I can't answer it immediately because it's kind of a, what do you call it, a package deal. It is what it is. So for me to answer that, I'd have to kind of hit the rewind button 9 months and kind of be oriented towards a completely different set of possibilities. As you know, my general sensibility is more ephemeral, ethereal. My main medium is photons, right? Generally speaking. So you know what my own natural predispositions are. No, I remember in the early days, of this project, I was talking to the Arts Commission about, James Young and doing a conceptual piece that was more about, kind of critiquing something that sort of subverts, and critiques the whole notion of a monument or a memorial, and they didn't want any of it, like none of that, And that's what I'm going to ask James about. He's giving a talk here on Thursday for this colloquium that I'm leading at the Watson Theater at 6 o'clock on Thursday. And that's one of the things I want to ask James about, because I want to share with him my experience of, and the police officers are like, Shimon, we don't want conceptual, it wasn't just the Arts Commission in this case, we don't want conceptual this, we don't want conceptual that. We want it to get it, we want to get it immediately, and we want to feel something, So, so for me to be able to answer your question right now, I would have to be able to imagine myself in a parallel universe instantaneously, and I'm simply not smart enough to do that on the spot. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.